Initially, the city commission and the mayor were very serious about capping or banning application fees altogether. That was our initial challenge.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. Hello and welcome to episode 131. Today, we're going to discuss an issue that's happening right here in Grand Rapids, but it affects landlords and rental property owners everywhere. So if you're listening to this and you're not in Grand Rapids, I encourage you to pay attention because this is coming to your community. And it has to do with the affordable housing challenge that many communities are facing as rents rise and neighborhoods gentrify. What's happening is that as tenants find it more difficult to find and afford housing, those communities and their elected representatives are increasingly pointing the finger of blame at the landlords and the rental property management companies, as well as the investors. And they're looking for ways to legislate our behavior in order to solve this problem. Just this week, the Grand Rapids Mayor and City Commission voted to approve a rental application ordinance, which will be very consequential to all landlords and property management companies. In order to help explain and understand this ordinance, I've invited Clay Powell, the director of the Rental Property Owners Association, the RPOA. Clay has been involved in this issue on the RPOA's behalf since its inception. Clay, thanks for being here.
Hey, good morning, Brian. You're welcome.
So you have been involved with this from the start, and I know a lot of people are just finding out about it. Can you kind of give us some background as to your involvement with this?
Sure. It actually started before the actual discussion about a specific ordinance came into play. Well over a year ago, the city of Grand Rapids formed a group to talk about affordable housing issues and discussed a wide variety of things. And then came out with some recommendations, 11 of those recommendations, in fact, went back to the commission. And the 11th one, which we fought really hard to keep off the list of recommendations, was to do something about rental application fees. So that's where it started, and it's actually been about a year since those recommendations were put forward. The City Commission tackled a bunch of other recommendations, which they're still working on, but it was about January of this year when they started to have serious discussions with us and other advocates for different approaches to application fees, and then we started hammering out the details.
So I definitely want to get into what this means to landlords and rental property owners here in Grand Rapids and what they're going to have to do to address this ordinance. But I think we should start with the reason for this. I mean, what was the problem in the first place with rental application fees that they were trying to solve?
Well, there are a number of folks who are looking for rental properties in the Grand Rapids area who find it very frustrating because they apply over and over and over again for rentals, and they never seem to be able to connect with one or get accepted. So the concern is that someone's paying $50, or let's just say that's kind of like an average number, $50 for every application. They apply to 10 different locations. They've spent $500, and they still don't get a rental unit. Now, of course, there's a lot of variety of different reasons why that may be the case, but probably one of the biggest reasons is that there's only so many rental units available to a large number of people, and whoever is going to have the best application meets all the criteria first is going to get the rental unit. And it doesn't mean that the person who applied 2 or 3 slots down the line from that person might not have also been eligible, but someone else gets it first if they meet all the criteria. So, and in many of those cases, that money is spent and it's not available to that person to spend on another unit somewhere for another application. So they begin to run out of funds to even apply for a rental unit. So that was pretty much the bottom line of the issue.
So I can definitely see how if you're paying an average of $50, and we don't know if that's the actual average, but let's just say it is, per application fee, and you fill out 5 to 10 of these, I mean, that's $250 to $500. I can see the problem. I think the question is, that we'll talk about today, is does this really address that problem? And how can we as the RPOA approach this new ordinance? Going back to the beginning, because you've been part of this from the start, and you've been with all these meetings and talked to Homes for All, who was real proponents of this ordinance, as well as you've talked to all of the commissioners and the mayor. What was the sentiment in the beginning? Because I know that they actually wanted to ban application fees altogether. Originally,
there was a belief that the application fees were the crux of the problem, that folks couldn't apply to a number of enough rental units to finally get a rental unit because they'd run out of money to do so. But then I began to investigate what the real issues were and had meetings with folks from the Homes for All group and others, and really discovered what the real problem was in a lot of cases was that the applicants were not aware of why they were being rejected, or at least they were saying they were not aware of why they were being rejected, and that their real concern was they wanted to know why they were being turned down or denied a rental, and they felt like if they could solve that problem, that would help remedy the situation, although they still felt like that the application fee was a huge stumbling block for them. So it's really a combination of a lot of different reasons, but they all go back to the same very reason, and that is there's just not enough rental property available in and around the city of Grand Rapids for all those who are looking for a unit to live in.
So the part of what they were looking for was transparency. What criteria will a potential tenant be judged upon? Whether it be credit score, or, past tenant history with, conversations with previous landlords, and then why are they being rejected after that? So does this ordinance address that?
So that was really our solution to them for part of the problem was, well, most of rental property owners provide the criteria up front, and we agreed that it would be very helpful if there was transparency up front so that any applicant would know what they're going to be screened against. So that became quickly one of the first and obvious low-hanging fruit solutions is that, let's make sure that we're giving all applicants the criteria they need to do so they can judge before they even pay an application fee whether or not they believe they would meet the criteria. So they wouldn't have to worry about spending money in a situation where it's pretty obvious that they wouldn't be able to meet the criteria.
Yeah. So if, for example, the criteria was you must have a 700 credit score, the applicant should know what their credit score is and not even fill out that application.
Correct, and it may be you must earn 3 times the monthly rent. You cannot have pets. You cannot have a past due utility bill in the last so many months. You cannot have a past due water bill with the city of Grand Rapids, and so on and so forth.
Or an eviction in your history.
Or an eviction in your recent history. There's all different kinds of criteria. Everybody uses different kind of criteria. They choose that criteria usually based upon the kind of rental unit they have and its location and how much that rent is. So it can be very challenging for someone obviously to know when they're going to apply for a rental unit if they're not told what all those criteria are to actually know whether or not they would be eligible.
Now, it seems to me, and I've had several professional property management companies screening tenants on my behalf, and I know the RPOA teaches many training courses and classes on how to screen for tenants. That seems like something that is a no-brainer that any property management company or landlord would disclose up front.
We believe so, and that's why we had no problem initially when that was one of the things that was talked about in terms of applying that to an ordinance. I think it should be clear, though, that initially the city commission and the mayor were very serious about capping or banning application fees altogether. That was our initial challenge. That's what we had to face. And my initial meeting with the city manager in the city of Grand Rapids was he basically put it on the table and said, Clay, the city commission is going to do something about application fees. If you don't come up with some other way to work with us, they will cap or ban the fees. So he pretty much laid it on the table that we had no real alternative other than to work with them on coming up with something to help the city commission and the city address this issue.
So that's where it started. So on the table at the beginning was capping or banning the application fees altogether. Why is that not a good idea?
Well, there are a lot of, if you're a property management company or a rental property owner, you can probably figure that out pretty quick. I mean, there's costs that go into doing screening, not just a credit report or criminal report, but you may have costs with a staff or other services that you utilize to do the screening process, and those costs vary all over the place. Of course, there are some folks who don't do any screening at all, which is very dangerous. So there's no cost involved. But so I guess the cost is anywhere from zero to what we discovered to be about $75. A lot of property management companies, especially, are now using online property management services, which provide this service for screening tenants, and there's just a fixed cost for that, and that seems to be anywhere between $25 and $50, depending on what you're asking that company to do in terms of screening.
Why is it important to screen your tenants?
Well, from the get, it's probably the second most important thing you can do in the business. The first is getting the right deal, right? Making sure that you don't spend too much money, over rehab a house before you're going to rent it. The second piece is determining who is the best tenant to put in the property. A bad tenant can ruin an investment in a pretty quick hurry, and that can happen from having to evict someone, and for all different kinds of things, including causing problems in the neighborhood, causing problems with the neighbors, causing problems with the other tenants. You can have perfectly good tenants move out in a multi-unit building because one tenant is causing real frustrations. You can end up having frustrations with local law enforcement because of activity going on at your rental property. A person may appear to be a person that can afford your unit based upon various different things, but then you find out that they were indeed, let go from their employment a week ago, even though they were employed a month ago and had, check stubs to prove that or those kinds of things. So it's really important from an economic standpoint and from a management of your rental units to prevent other issues happening that can really frustrate the process.
Yeah, so I think anyone who's ever owned rental property or managed rental property knows that there are bad tenants out there. There are people that you want to screen and make sure that they're appropriate for your unit.
That's correct, and it's one of the things that I know one of the rental property owners that actually presented at the meeting for when they took the vote on the ordinance also made it very clear that even if you do all the screening process, oftentimes applicants will provide you falsified information, falsified check stubs, falsified social security numbers, falsified names, and so on and so forth. So even if you do the screening process, you have to be very diligent to make sure that what you have in hand is legitimate.
Yeah, I found it very interesting that property manager noted that in Grand Rapids you can buy fake check stubs and fake, references. Correct,
and that is one of the things that was initially, proposed. Well, why can't an applicant just bring a copy of their credit report with them or their criminal report with them and then they don't have to pay for this and the owners can use it. And that was my very point, is that it's extremely simple nowadays for people to tamper with a credit report and make it look great, or have someone do that for you who has that technical expertise. And then, those folks charge a small fee to do that. We as property owners have to be very careful. It's much better to get that information directly from the source, from the credit bureaus, than it is to get it from a third party or even from an applicant. It's just very dangerous to go down that road.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. So if that was their position in the beginning, let's ban application fees or cap them, why did we even negotiate with them or go down any road with them? Why didn't we just stand in opposition of everything they were trying to do?
Well, there's some political realities, and that's something that's very difficult for many of us to either come to grips with, I guess, or understand or want to understand. When you're a rental property owner, you often do not live or vote in the community and where you own your properties, so that can become very problematic. So it's a given fact that those who live in the community have more power more often than rental property owners do, because they have the ability to vote a commissioner or a mayor in and out of office. So that's an extreme powerful tool to have in your toolkit, which we often do not have and do not have in the city of Grand Rapids. We have a good relationship with the city of Grand Rapids and are able to negotiate things and have been able to get them to understand that rental property and housing is extremely important to their community, and that they need to work with us so they do not make things worse for communities such as affordable housing. But at the same time, when they have advocates such as the Homes for All folks pushing really, really hard, and those are the folks who can vote them in or out of office, they have to pay particular attention to them. So why did we go down the road of negotiating something? Because if we hadn't negotiated something, the fallback position probably for the commission would have been, well, if you're not willing to negotiate something, we'll disband the fee. So that was what's hanging over our head. We needed to do something, and what we attempted to do was to do something that was going to be as palatable as possible and as inexpensive as possible, and with the least amount of paperwork as possible as we could come up with, to try to address the need and fix the problem, at least in the way that the city commission would like to get it fixed.
And at the end of the day, the RPOA's position on this was neutral. And I know that there was some pushback from some of our members. Why are we neutral on this?
We worked hard on the actual language of the ordinance, and we did take a neutral position up until the final posting of the ordinance that was supposed to go before the commission on the night of the vote.
Yeah, because it was changing up until the last minute, wasn't it?
It did change quite frequently up until the last minute. There were several changes, little tweaks here and there. We had a chance to look at some minor modifications on the Monday before the Tuesday of the vote. We didn't see any real big issues with those. We weren't extremely happy with some of the changes, but it didn't really change how we looked at what was going to happen. However, between that time and the actual vote, on Tuesday evening, there were several more amendments, one of which we were not particularly crazy about. And then there were a few more amendments on the last evening, which some of those were actually probably to our benefit in the long run, because there was some confusing language and they wanted to make sure they had that correct.
Well, let's actually get into the ordinance. I mean, what does this mean in all practical matters for landlords and property management companies?
Well, the piece that we talked about initially, which is disclosing the criteria before someone becomes an applicant, is part of that. You must do that before someone makes an application.
So what does that mean? To disclose verbally, in writing? Do you have to send a certified letter? How do you disclose the criteria?
It just says in writing, which would mean apparently at the time of the application process or at the time someone is viewing the rental unit that's available, you could hand them the list of criteria. There'll need to be a disclosure on there as well about what the application fee is going to be. And I'm guessing that the city of Grand Rapids will require a disclosure on that form that says if you believe that the application fee exceeds a reasonable amount, you can file a complaint, because that is also part of the ordinance.
So you have to let the prospective tenant know that there is a complaint procedure if they find the application fee to be too high.
Right. If they believe it to be too excessive.
Too excessive.
Yes.
Would it be wise when you're disclosing this in writing to get that potential applicant's signature that it has been disclosed?
Yes, we have to work out all those details. In fact, I have meetings we're trying to set up at the City of Grand Rapids now to try to go over all the documents that would be required and disclosures. And what I would love to do is make this extremely simple for our owners and members, is come up with documentation the city agrees to in advance, that if you do all of these things and document it in this way, that this process becomes very simple. So that's our next effort, to work on that. Another piece is that when you advertise the rental property, you also have to disclose the application fee. A lot of owners and property management companies already do that, but this would require that in the advertisement.
How do you disclose it? I mean, what does that mean, disclose the application
Well, just essentially say, this is available unit, such and such unit, it's a wonderful unit, et cetera, like you normally would with the monthly rental. And then you'd have to tack on that the application fee is whatever it is, say $25 or $45.
Now, could that be like, real small at the bottom of the advertisement, or does it need to be big and bold at the headline?
There's no specifics on how it has to be done. It just has to be in the text.
It seems like so far all this should be standard operating procedure anyway. Disclose your application fee and disclose the criteria under which you're looking at the tenant.
It really is, and that's why the initial ordinance was pretty much looked like that in itself. And there were other things added to it, and these were the things that we really struggled with, and we talked to them about specifically. They want to have us identify the specifics for the costs that go into the application fee. So basically asking a property management company or owner to justify the costs that are included in the application fee. So this starts to go down a road which we were a little bit more wary about, and wanted to make sure that what was written in the ordinance wouldn't prevent us from collecting our costs for doing, for instance, income verification or employment verification or doing rental history checks. So those are the kinds of things that are still we're still able to charge for, but we have to, when someone is looking at applying, and at that time we have to disclose to them the amount of money we're spending on a credit report and criminal report, and the amount of money that we were spending on making phone calls for their rental history to previous landlords and for employment verification and those types of things. So it's very specific, so that a tenant can quickly see whether or not they believe in their mind, or an applicant believes in their mind, that the application fee is reasonable.
So it sounds like an itemized quote or estimate of what the actual costs are that go into screening. Is that correct?
That's correct. For some companies, that'll be extremely easy. I know some of our members just use our decision report as their only screening tool. And for them, it would be very simple. We use this particular decision report. Here's the criteria that goes into that decision report. This is the cost of the report. It's very fixed. They may or may not do any other type of screening, which may or not be a good thing, but a lot of folks use some kind of credit report or criminal and credit report combined as the initial screening device, which is a very fixed cost.
And when does this get disclosed? Is this part of the do you disclose it up front along with the criteria, or is this something that can be disclosed after the fact?
Yeah, it'll be disclosed right up front along with the criteria.
Okay. And one of those line items is administrative fees. A lot of time goes into calling past landlords, getting this credit history and all that. There was a lot of pushback on administrative fees. Can you talk about that?
Well, the advocates for capping the fees and banning the fees made it very specific that they did not want to see any kind of application fees include administrative fees. So this is how it ended up being worded in the ordinance itself. It says application fees shall not include administrative fees, with the exception of actual reasonable costs necessarily incurred to check rental history and employment verification. So those are the things that are allowed. So if you have a staff person making phone calls to previous landlords or calling the employer, you can charge for those costs.
And that would be considered administrative.
Correct.
So why would the Homes for All or Housing for All push back against administrative? Do they not feel that that's a legitimate expense?
I don't believe they understand that there's a cost for doing this business. Time and time again, they said it's just a cost of doing business. They should just not charge for that. It was very, very frustrating to get them to understand that what they were saying was absolutely true. It is a cost of doing business, so therefore we have to collect those funds from somewhere. And we made it very clear that if we can't charge an application fee or charge for those administrative fees, the money is likely to come from rent, which would just increase the rent locally.
Yeah. And let me just add an aside here that the cost of business, cost of doing business, does come out in rent. If you're wondering why partially the rent is increasing, it's because of the cost of doing business.
That's correct. So it's challenging to convince those who do not want to be convinced that the cost of doing business is something that we all have to bear, and when it comes to the business world.
So what else do we need to do as landlords and management companies when we take applications to make sure we are conforming with this new ordinance? So
to kind of run down real quickly the things that we have to do, I think it makes it easier just to kind of outline each individual thing. So first, we're going to advertise our rental units, and we're going to say what the application fee is. We're going to provide the screening criteria up front, along with a disclosure of what the costs are associated with those application fees that someone has to pay. And then another part of the ordinance is that if a tenant is not screened, so if you have a process set up in which the unit has been filled, but the screening was never occurred, then we have to return those funds to the applicant. That is typically done by a lot of property management companies already, but they made it very specific in the ordinance. That probably won't apply to a lot of property management companies which use online services, because the screening happens automatically as soon as the application's made. So that wouldn't really apply to a lot of different property management companies. So would those property management companies then have to disclose, well, once you fill out this application, you're committing that money, it's not coming back to you because you're going to be screened immediately? Yes, there may be some property management companies or other landlords who are using those types of services that may want to disclose up the front that once you push the button and apply, screening will be automatic, and a refund for your application fees will not be available. That probably wouldn't hurt anything to have that done. It's not required in the ordinance for that to be done. It's only required in the ordinance to return the fees if you don't do the screening. The other part of the ordinance, which was a little bit challenging, we all have our federal and state disclosure requirements when we deny someone a rental application based upon something that we found in their screening during the screening process. What this ordinance requires is a more detailed explanation. So as we all know, if you deny someone based upon a credit report, you basically say you denied them based upon this particular credit report or this information, and it was obtained at this location, and if the applicant feels it's incorrect, they can contact that provider of that information and see if they can get it corrected. Well, what this ordinance does, which is probably going to be one of the things that we're going to have to figure out how we're going to work with, is it requires the rental owner or the property management company to give more detailed information about why the applicant was denied. So the first thing could be they were denied because of their credit and criminal report information found from this individual, just like we're currently doing. But if there's no detailed available credit report, we could not tell the applicant specifically what that was that kicked that credit report out. But if we're doing, for instance, previous landlord phone calls, and that previous landlord says something derogatory about this applicant, we would also have to disclose that to the applicant in as much detail as we have available. And the same thing would go with employment verification. If we discover something in those phone calls that is made the applicant rejected, then we have to disclose what those reasons were. So those are the areas where I want to work with the City of Grand Rapids to be very specific about what information needs to be provided in a way that is consistent so that we're meeting the ordinance without providing information that's not necessary. One of the things that was included in the ordinance was that we only have to provide that information to the extent that is permitted by state and federal law. So if there's anything in that process would not allow us to give that information to the applicant, then we do not have to do so.
What, like, for example, what would state or federal law prohibit the rental property owners from disclosing to the potential tenants?
Well, it depends on how you read the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Most believe, and most credit reporting services would tell you cannot give the applicant a copy of their credit report. So if they're denied based upon the credit report, all you can basically say to them is that you were denied based upon that credit report, but you do not provide them a copy of the credit report. There may be other information you want to be careful about providing so you don't avoid giving information to a third party. So if you're mailing this information, you wouldn't want to send information that would, for instance, disclose someone's full Social Security number or other information that might be something that the Privacy Act protects. So that's where we're going to have to be very careful about what we send to the applicant.
So there's a couple problematic things with the last couple of requirements there. One is, some of these screening services give you the thumbs up or the thumbs down. They don't actually tell you what part of the criteria was not met. So would it be sufficient just to say, well, we use this screening software and they gave you the thumbs down?
Well, that is probably going to be the route that will be the easiest route to go. If you use a screening service that does all these things for you and they give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down or some kind of a green, yellow, red light or some kind of a score, that might be the easiest way to go, because all you have to do in that particular case is inform the tenant that this is what the results were of your screening, and if you need the detailed information or you believe that to be incorrect, you can contact this company. Because we would have no actual knowledge of any of the information behind the scenes in those cases, because in most cases we do not get that information.
And then the other problematic thing is if you're talking to past employers or current employers or past landlords, how likely are they going to be to give you the real information if they know that everything they say to you is going to be passed on to the tenant?
Well, this is where we have a real concern. So if this becomes very popular thing to do and everybody's complying with it, most landlords may start to say, well, I'm not going to give you any information that may come back to bite me in the future. So either they'll say very little, like maybe actually confirm, yes, they were a tenant of mine. That might be as far as they go, which is not very useful information. It's a little useful, but it's not terribly useful. You're looking for more than that usually in that conversation. So that could ultimately come back to bite the community if we can't find out from previous landlords what a tenant's situation really was. We could end up putting in tenants that we should have known were going to be a problematic tenant.
So how do we then get accurate verification from past landlords and employers or current employers if they're going to be afraid to give us the real scoop?
Well, that's where I'm going to hopefully come up with something with the city of Grand Rapids, which will allow us to ask questions and we can document the answers to those questions on a form. So I suspect it'll be very much like something like, did a tenant live with you between such and such date and such date? Yes. Were they evicted? Yes or no. If you evicted them, which type of a notice did you have to use? A non-payment? Did you have to use it for a drug eviction? Those kind of things. And then, yes or no questions. Another question might be, did you return their security deposit? Yes or no. Would you rent to them? Again, yes or no. So it would be very general things that we could ask the previous landlord, which they hopefully would feel comfortable to tell us, which in part are public record anyway. That could be included on a form that every landlord could use and very consistent.
Yeah, it seems like it's creating some obstacles here for property management companies to do their job.
It really does. We obviously have conversations that are far more in depth than that typically when we're calling a previous landlord, if that landlord, of course, is willing to say something. A lot of landlords are not currently willing to even give you more information, or the information I just kind of outlined. They might not be willing to share that. So it will be perhaps in some cases more difficult.
Are there any other items on the list of things that landlords and property managers need to keep in mind as they screen tenants?
Well, as they're screening under the new ordinance, I think they can continue to do as they have been doing. They just need to make sure they're prepared to do the disclosures that are required and to provide the information that's being asked for in the format in which the city is going to eventually want that information. The last things left pretty much within the ordinance that need to be complied with are making sure that you return those application fees if someone was not screened. The other piece of the ordinance pretty much just outlines the time frame in which the applicant can make a complaint. So they have 30 days to file a complaint if they believe that the landlord has violated the ordinance in some way, including an excessive application fee. And then once that's done, then the landlord has 14 days to return the fee if they have not screened the applicant.
So let's talk about this fee, this violation fee, because I get very nervous anytime the city has power to charge fees and violations, because there's nothing they love better than doing that. What does this mean to us as rental property owners? Should we be concerned?
Well, we should be concerned, but I'm not sure to what degree we need to be concerned, because the city made it very clear that someone cannot file a complaint unless they have been denied. So unless an applicant has been officially denied through the screening process, they're not eligible to file a complaint. Then they have 30 days to file that complaint if they have been denied. And then at that point, the rental property owner has to provide the information to the city to justify what they did or did not do according to the applicant's complaint.
Tell us what the fees are.
Well, the fines were something we really got frustrated with. We asked for them to be lowered. The first offense is $100. The second offense is $200, and then it's $1,000 for every offense thereafter. So that's pretty substantial. We made the argument that there's going to be a lot of rental property owners who are new to the business, or property management companies that are new to the area, aren't going to be aware of this particular ordinance, or somehow it slips through the cracks, or a new employee forgets to do something a certain way, and they're going to get charged $100 for that first offense. And my biggest worry is for property management companies that have new employees who somehow make a mistake, and it becomes not just a first offense, becomes a second or a third offense, and that third offense can be extremely expensive. So that's my biggest worry when it comes to the violations. I don't believe this is a difficult ordinance to comply with, but someone who doesn't know about it, of course, is not going to know to comply at all. So that was our biggest concern. We asked for it not to be a fee for the first offense at all. At least one commissioner suggested that it shouldn't be as much as $100, but that didn't win the day. So those are the fines and the fees. And I guess the good news in this whole thing is that it doesn't become effective until November 7th of 2018. So we have several months here to get information out about it and to negotiate what kind of forms and disclosures that will be required, and that this whole thing will get evaluated again by November 7th of 2019. So that'll give us an opportunity to find out a lot of different things, what kinds of headaches it's caused that they didn't expect, what things worked, what didn't work, and if it's even having the impact that they thought it would have.
There's two more directions I want to go here. One is just to look at Homes for All and what they're actually trying to accomplish. The other is to talk about the RPOA and how we work behind the scenes to work with these groups and to work with the city. But let's start with Homes for All, because I think some of their points that they have are legitimate. I watched this meeting several times online, especially the opening comments. And one of the representatives of Homes for All, I'd like to read what she said, because I don't like landlords being vilified. But at the same time, there are some landlords who are doing things that are causing this problem in the first place. So let me just read verbatim what she said. She said, "It's necessary to regulate landlords who are taking advantage of our currently unregulated application process to exploit vulnerable applicants for profit and use the tight housing market as an excuse to do so." I don't know if she's referring to all landlords as predatory, or there are certain landlords that are predatory. So let's talk about that, because the RPOA trains its landlords on how to do things right, how to work with the city, follow fair housing laws, all of that. So who are these predatory landlords that are causing this problem in the first place?
Well, unfortunately, it's been a few years back now, but there was one particular landlord which was abusing, and actually I would say was committing fraud by advertising available units that were really not available, and taking applications for units that were not available and collecting those fees. The screening was never being done. This person was just using this as a way to collect funds. That's probably the most extreme example, and I believe that's where that started. So that really raised the red flag in the community, like, well, how many other rental property owners are doing this type of thing? Of course, we were completely opposed to that approach. It's illegal, and we believe that they should use the local laws to enforce those kind of things. And thank goodness that particular person was not a member here, so that was an extra bonus. It is probably true that there are a small handful of rental property owners, and I don't know who those individuals or which companies those might be, that might be using this as an opportunity to have an additional revenue stream by charging a higher application fee, something beyond what their costs are. Although I would believe that would be difficult to do, because the market is going to control what application fees can be. And what I mean by that is that if you're charging a $100 application fee, you're probably going to see a lot less applicants, which may be to your disadvantage. So it's hard for me to believe that there would be a great number of individuals abusing the system and taking advantage of people. I believe Homes for All attitude is that, as it seems to be across the land of America, is that somehow rental property owners should never make a profit in any way, shape, or form. And that enters into their belief that they're being taken advantage of if there's any additional cost other than the actual cost of the housing itself. So that's where I believe all of those very emotional comments come from. I don't believe that statement represented reality at the commission. It's unfortunate they feel that way, but I'm pretty confident that the large majority of rental property owners are trying to provide affordable, safe housing for the community within the market rate rents that are available.
And we are all business owners, so we are absolutely hoping to make a profit, and that is part of it. But I think we can both say that the RPOA and the vast majority of its members, hopefully all of its members, do not engage in predatory practices and try to extract more from application fees than is necessary to do a proper screening on a prospective tenant.
That's a very accurate statement, Brian, and it would probably be true to say that the application fees charged by most of our members would be either nothing or a very small application fee. And one of my great worries, and we expressed this worry throughout the whole process of negotiations, is that by regulating application fees and the whole process of the application, that it will increase the cost of the application process, not make it cheaper. And if we can't do that through the application fees itself, we'll do that through additional rent.
Yeah, anytime government tries to regulate an industry that they don't understand, they only succeed in driving up prices.
That's correct. And there seemed to be only one commissioner that did understand the industry well enough. He was the only one to vote no.
Yes. Yes. Unfortunately, he was the only one. And that feeds into the next topic here, which is lobbying against this type of legislation. I mean, Wednesday night when people showed up to express their views in front of the commission, the decision had already been made at that point. There was really no room to change anything, because it was that cake was pretty much baked. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely true. I think the thing that folks need to understand about lobbying and about the way things work, the image of the RPOA now is a professional group of rental property owners doing the right thing in the community, providing housing for the community. In the old days, if the RPOA were to try to come to the city and talk about doing something, the city pretty much would have rejected or turned a deaf ear to that conversation. They wouldn't be interested in even having that conversation. Since we started to engage with the city of Grand Rapids and participate in supporting some of the city commissioners that do understand the business, then we have started to get a place at the table to have discussions. So we can now at least talk to the city about our perspective and our concerns, and they usually, so far in every case I can think of, they've asked us to come to the table to talk about the very specifics of what needs to go into whatever particular legislation there might be happening. So they're no longer doing things in a vacuum without our participation. They now invite us to participate. We get a chance to be involved in what happens. Sometimes we're very successful in completely killing something, and it never comes to fruition. Other times we have to negotiate, as we have with this particular ordinance. Sometimes we win a little, sometimes we lose a little. Like this particular ordinance could have been a lot worse than what it was if we had not been participating. So it's really critical for all rental property owners associations and other folks and other real estate investors associations to understand that they have to build relationships, political relationships that are effective.
And talk about specifically in this case how you and the Government Affairs Committee have been involved in this issue from the beginning.
Well, as soon as I knew that this was going to be a concern, I had personally had conversation with the city manager and say, where are we going to go with this? What is the city commission's position on it? And then once we established what that position was, then I came back to our Government Affairs Committee and said, this is where they're going with this ordinance and what the realities of the situation are, and asked that committee what they would like us to do. And they basically gave me the charging orders of going out and negotiating the best possible ordinance we could to try to address the situation, to help the city commission with their issue while protecting our industry. So that's when that process started. Our first initial meetings with the city manager and the attorney's office at the city. We're looking at some sample ordinances. Many of those were not acceptable. So we basically took those ordinances and cut out what we thought was not acceptable and left in what we thought was acceptable. And then we had subsequent meetings with the city to negotiate details. And then they had meetings individually with the Homes for All advocates. And of course, they expressed their likes or dislike for things in the ordinance. And then we went from there, bouncing back and forth to try to come up with something that everybody would not like, which is kind of what most politicians will say. If everybody walks away from the table unhappy, they must have done something right. So that's kind of where we were at with this situation. Neither side was happy, but in the end, it got something for the city commission they felt like was going to work.
Yeah. So, and this was an ongoing effort over the past 6 months at least?
Yes, it started around January, even before the holiday, but really kicked in seriously in January and February.
Yeah, this is a good opportunity to just say, look, if you own rental property and you want to treat it as a business, you need to invest in the groups that are actually out there advocating for your business, which means you should join your RPOA. You should contribute to the PACs, even though the PAC wasn't directly involved in this, but they help get people elected who will be advocates for rental property. You need to be involved yourself. I want people to understand the importance of being an RPOA member, of contributing to the PAC, and of getting involved.
Well, here's a fact that if there's no organization available to fight these issues, then the cities of the state, whoever it might be, will do what they want to do. They'll just decide and make the decisions without any input from anyone. When you have an association like the RPOA and you build relationships with the city and the communities in your area, you will have an opportunity to negotiate things, to fight things, to express your opinion, and to make things happen or not happen. And those things are done by professional people and by volunteers who are well versed in the process and making and be successful as they possibly can be. The RPOA has been doing this for at least professionally and effectively, I believe, for 20 plus years now. And we've learned a lot of lessons along the way, the right way to do things, the wrong way to do things, how to be the most effective in what we're doing. If it wasn't for our state organization, state legislators would not be aware of anything related to our industry. And when bad legislation were to pop up that would adversely impact our business, it would just happen. But we now have a voice at the table. We actually are asked by legislators what we think about particular legislation. That never happened before we started getting really involved at the state level with legislation, lobbying, and with supporting the correct legislators with PAC funds.
It's important to be clear that there are a lot of great volunteers in the RPOA, both on the Government Affairs Committee, the Education Committee, the Conference Committee. There's a lot of opportunities there for people to get involved, and I encourage people to do so. But it's also important to note, Clay, that you and your staff are professional and you're being paid by the RPOA to be in your positions. And I think you're doing a fantastic job advocating on behalf of the RPOA at the state level, the local level, and at the national level as well. And that it's important for people listening to this to realize your RPOA membership is going to pay toward paying for your salary, the staff's salary, and the excellent job that you guys are doing. So anyone out there who's wondering, why should I be a member of the RPOA? This is why. Because you are out there fighting to protect our rights as landlords.
Well, thank you, Brian. And that's exactly what this staff does every day. We have this industry as our top priority. Our staff is so dedicated, they take it as a personal issue for them to protect landlords and advocate for landlords. It's not just their job. I mean, the people that work here, some of them are rental property owners, and they really, even if they're not, they're passionate about the members. And some of those members, I think, are friends. What we're doing here at the RPOA and all this lobbying stuff that we do, we have them in mind constantly, and we're trying to do the best job we can for them. We're never going to back off on something just to be backing off and make life easy. We have to go down the hard road sometimes.
So, Clay, I want to thank you for all the hard work you've put into this. I know that the outcome may not be satisfactory to a lot of rental property owners, but having watched how the sausage is made over the past 6 months plus, I can tell you that it's far superior to where it could have been. The RPOA stance has only been to advocate for the landlords and the rental property owners. So thank you for all the work you're doing for the RPOA, and thank you for taking the time to explain this very important issue to us today.
Well, thank you, Brian, and we appreciate all the support that we have too.
This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.